Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the ordinary meeting of Council for the 24th of July 2024. Nala kadich wajak mort kain kadak nija walilat butcher, we jinang wajak kadajan, we nyiting bula yeye. We acknowledge the Wajak people as the traditional owners of the Greater Fremantle Walilat area, and we recognise that their cultural and heritage beliefs are still important today. The meeting is being recorded and streamed live online. While all care is taken to maintain privacy, visitors in the public gallery and members of the public submitting a question may be captured in the recording. We have Councillor Lang on a leave of absence. We have Councillor Graham as an apology tonight. I believe Councillor Thompson is joining us shortly. Do we have any disclosures of interest by members in tonight's agenda? No. The agenda contains responses to questions that were taken on notice at the ordinary meeting of Council held on the 10th of July 2024. So that takes us through to public question time. I have 5 people listed to speak. And I'm assuming you might all want to speak in public question time rather than before the specific item. So I'll work through the list. If you did want to speak later, of course, you can let me know. So first up, we have Ian Kerr.
Good, works. Thank you, Mayor. On 10th of July, the last council meeting, I asked why is it that responses to questions asked by myself and others at council meetings often fail to provide answers to the substance of the questions. The response was the city is of the belief that it provides appropriate responses to questions asked, which rather is a circular argument. I can assure you, however, that there are many in the community who do not share that belief. Not commenting or responding to any individual or personal opinions presented with questions is one thing. Failure to respond to objectively verifiable statements made as a part of a question is quite another. If the city really wishes to repair its relationship with the community, it has to start listening to both questions and the context for the questions. On the other hand, I was pleasantly surprised to see the level of documentation of, firstly, community engagement for the traffic calming and narrow streets policies and for the Fremantle Oval project, and secondly, changes made to the traffic calming and narrow streets policies as a result of community feedback and issues raised by elected members. It is important to document not only the process, but also the outcomes of community engagement, so that all of us can see how well views expressed in the engagement have been responded to in Council's decision making. With regard to the traffic calming and narrow streets policies, I note that many of the interventions to make streets safer for vulnerable users, pedestrians, cyclists and people with disabilities, rely for their effectiveness on management and enforcement, yet there is no mention of these in the policies. I ask the questions of what is the status of the narrow street safe access guidelines that accompanied the draft policy when advertised. I could find no reference to those or whether they have changed. And secondly, do the policies adequately take account of the increasing size of vehicles used in Australia and seemingly particularly in South Fremantle? I'd like to make my thanks to Councillors Sullivan, Van Dawson and Lorver, and my apologies if I missed anyone, for attending Sunday's meeting at Victoria Hall, and to Councillor Sullivan for his amendments to the item on sale of Victoria Hall, which is on tonight's agenda. I urge Council to support Councillor Sullivan's amendments as being aligned with Council's original decision to purchase, as well as providing appropriate mechanisms for ensuring the continuation of the cultural importance of the building. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. So there's a couple of questions about the narrow streets policy that we will answer now. I've got Alan standing in for Director of Infrastructure who's unwell. So
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. With regards to the guidelines are based on an internal document which helps the officers look at different aspects of the policies. So the policies are a high level. So the guidelines have been provided to the elected members through the discussion process and engagement process. With regards to vehicles, each area is assessed on its merits, and the size of vehicles, whether that be large vehicles or smaller vehicles, are taken into consideration when looking at traffic calming solutions.
Can I confirm the guidelines are complete at this stage?
They are complete, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, and the next person is Mark Woodcock.
Good evening, everyone, and thanks for the opportunity to ask these questions. My first question was referencing the minutes in the agenda from the last meeting. So the minutes came out for the last meeting, and they had a public question time response inside of it. And then in the agenda this week, it referred to the same public question time, but the record is different. So I was just wondering why there's a difference.
Is that your only question?
No.
Thanks.
Okay, so I've got, on my questions I noticed, I've got a list. I've got the,
So please read out the questions for transparency. We're making sure that people who are online understand what's being asked, and we'll attempt to answer them here.
Well, that was the question. I've just got the supporting documentation so people can read it. If they read the minutes in the agenda, they'll see it.
Sure, I think we can respond to that now. So thanks, Mark.
Through the chair, without direct reference to any question in particular, what we would have done is refine the answers because the answers sometimes on the night are probably not as neat as we would like them.
Whole questions are missing.
Okay, thanks. We'll, if you want to email that through, that's great.
I will. Yep.
The next person we have is.
I had some more questions.
We don't go back and forth. That's why I was asking if you have any further questions.
Yes, I had further questions.
Okay. Well, for now, I'm happy for you to go through those, but just be clear in the future we don't sort of enter into a back and forth during question time.
Okay. Okay, so I've got some references to the upcoming plan for what's going to be developed on the Oval, and I've got some reference points back which are website connections and policies to the actual Fremantle Prisons Heritage area. The question was, does the Fremantle Council really want to go down in history as the one who started the end of the Western Australia's only UNESCO cultural heritage site? And then further on finances, given the significant losses incurred and audited comments last year, how much is the write-down of the city's investment in the RRG as of the 30th of June 2024? Next question, due to the Council's vague response to questions related to the financial year 25 budget consultation process and clearly inadequate responses, the inadequate existing long-term business plan, it is being asked yet again, what date will the city's long-term business plan be prepared and available for the ratepayers to see? The city has significantly underperformed in completing capital expenditure projects, with only a mere $6 million spent in the year of up to June 2024. The advertising of the proposed differential rate in the May 2024 council meeting, and there's a reference to the page number, refers to the asset sustainability ratio to be an important factor. How does the city plan to maintain this physical asset?
Thanks. All right, so we'll answer the ones that I think are questions rather than statements now. We'll take your comment about the Fremantle Oval as a comment. So I'll go to the Director of City Business on RRG, long-term financial plan, capital expenditure timing, and the asset sustainability ratio.
Through the Mayor, so we are still working through end of year processing, so that information will become available once we get through that process. With respect to the long-term financial plan, which I think you were referring to, we are going through the process of updating it at the moment. We're having a conversation with Council. We do look at that annually as part of the annual budget process as well. And we did respond or provide an answer with respect to the capital program and the $6 million spend last council meeting. However, I'll reiterate that we have acknowledged that we've delivered a third of the program to date. However, we have progressed substantially major projects as part of that program, including South Beach toilets, Criminal Arts Centre Creative Hub, Criminal Public Golf Course, but in doing so, we've also set aside quite an increase in our reserves so that all of the projects as part of that program will continue to be delivered into the future.
Thanks. Any comment on asset sustainability ratio and whether that continues to be a metric?
We've answered that question previously.
Okay, thank you. And the next person I have is Marianne Goodlick.
Good evening. I'm asking the councillors and the CEO to reject all of the offers submitted for the proposed sale of Victoria Hall and withdraw Victoria Hall from being sold. I'm disappointed in the council for putting Victoria Hall up for sale. It is of high heritage value across architectural, cultural and social values. Victoria Hall should remain in the Fremantle City Council's assets in perpetuity for the community and not be sold. It is of high value heritage-wise and it is being used for the purpose it was designed for. Only by keeping it in the ownership of the Fremantle City Council can the history and the integrity of this building be ensured for future generations. Fremantle Town Centre needs more quality cultural spaces for the community, not just more hospitality, retail and tourism. We need to support our next generation of performers, especially the students at John Curtin College of the Arts, to provide them with access to inner city performance venues such as Victoria Hall, to develop their talents and skills, especially when their own school's performance space is utilised to the maximum. Fremantle City Council needs to provide more support to theatre groups like the Fremantle Theatre Company and give them a commitment, allowing them to remain in a performance space and location which they want to be in and in which they can have a future, not being kicked from pillar to post, which are the ultimate stated objectives of the potential buyer developers. If the buyers developers have their way, it will ensure the deterioration of Victoria Hall, a building in which the council has already invested $2 million of the community's ratepayer funds in its restoration. We don't want or need more office space conversions for this building or adaptive reuse into a wedding venue. I think it is wrong to sell this asset for a pittance, which is what I believe will happen. I've heard of $1.2 million being touted, especially when council has wasted money on political events and allegedly paid the fines of the political allies of the former mayor using ratepayer funds. Money for the ongoing maintenance of Victoria Hall and the Fremantle Town Hall should come from some of the big businesses that don't contribute sufficiently to the Fremantle community as they should, but are happy to take from the rate-paying Fremantle community. The Victoria Hall scoring assessment table provided in the agenda addressing the Fremantle Council's own criteria shows the scores for each potential buyer as below 50%, all of them. This is a clear fail and therefore I believe all of the offers submitted should be rejected and Victoria Hall withdrawn from sale. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. And Elizabeth Megros.
Good evening, everyone. The article, A Reflection on Responsibility, remarkably talks 11 times about community. Presumably, it is paramount on the mind of the CEO to accommodate what they need, want, and expect. And as a side note, the ratepayers, the section of the community who pays the bills, are not mentioned once, nor is the imposed rate increase discussed anywhere. Given the best interests of the community are at their heart, and the fact that they had good reason to be happy and not worry about Victoria Hall because you told them the development of King Square would also secure its future with a new lease of life for the community. Why then is it that the community now faces the sale of the hall as a fait accompli, without any prior warning or engagement on their position or notice of any issue in relation to Victoria Hall, if there were any. How do you reflect on your PR YouTube video? No doubt paid for by the ratepayers. A brief look at the history of Victoria Hall. What should the community make of it now? Why does your report on Victoria Hall exclude a number of relevant facts? For the sake of transparency, ratepayers need to know that almost more than 20 years ago, $650,000 from the Heritage Fund were invested, besides $2.2 million in restoration. 3 years the hall stayed vacant between 2012 and 2015, and again for 10 months in 2019. For 3 years, Space Market occupied the hall for a peppercorn rate, and as now finally has surfaced, the use of Victoria Hall was gifted to the current tenant, the Fremantle Theatre Company. Did disposing of the Victoria Hall to the Fremantle Theatre Company occur by way of public tender? Were submissions from the community invited? Despite of what the community was made to believe, namely King Square development would deliver a new lease of life, the potential of Victoria Hall has so far not been realised because there were also years of inactivity and arrangements that didn't work in the best interest of the community due to council's poor management, promotion or model. Surely not the responsibility or the fault of the community. How were the different community interest groups invited or given the opportunity to consider the future possibility of the community resource and asset, the Victoria Hall? Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so I think the question in that was Victoria Hall leased to the Fremantle Theatre Company through a public process? So I think that's probably one for the Director of City Business.
Through the Mayor. So to date, the process has been an expression of interest process. The decision tonight is not to dispose of the hall. The Fremantle Theatre Company was offered a licence. It hasn't been disposed to them. We're not required to carry out a tender to offer a licence for the use of a building or a temporary use of the building. So all we're doing tonight is seeking, I guess, further feedback from council on some of the uses that have come forward as part of the expression of interest process. We're not currently happy with the prices we've received as part of that, and we'd like to go back to some of the community-focused uses and discuss price with those proponents.
Thank you. That's a more bigger answer than the question, I think. Okay, the final person I have listed to speak is John Dowson. No, the Director of City Business answered the question. So if you didn't hear the answer, it'll be in the minutes and in the recording. Thank you.
Right, good evening. Sunday night, the Fremantle Society spent a great deal of time and money putting on an event to talk about the city plan and Victoria Hall and so on. And it was good that 4 councillors turned up. Thank you, Councillors Kamada, Van Dawson, Sullivan and Lorver, and an apology from one other councillor. Victoria Hall is the last of the 30 theatres and music halls that Fremantle has had. Excuse the croaky voice. So it's the last one. And I won't go through the history of the other 2 times the Fremantle Society fought to save it, but it's very depressing to be here again trying to save something that obviously would be as a great community asset for theatre and should stay as a theatre. We sent you a video that Mayor Pettit made in 2019 he made a 2-minute video saying that the revitalisation of King Square was wonderful because it would help Victoria Hall. So what are you admitting? Are you selling it because you're admitting the revitalisation failed? We did our own video, and it wasn't 2 minutes, it was only 1 minute. And we thought it was a great video, cost us money, cost us time. We sent it in hoping that it could be shown tonight, and we're told that it is not allowed to be shown tonight. And that's very disappointing because we wanted to show you the character of the hall and the flavour of what we did on Sunday night. And it's not able to be shown. So we did send it to you tonight, the councillors, at 5:30. Can I ask, did the councillors get a copy of that? Okay, so that's there. Now, if you don't want to show our video, we're not allowed to show our video publicly. I hope it has some sway in your decision tonight. But we're going to send it to the Premier, and we think he might be interested because he has his haircut in Freo. He drives past Freo every day to go to Perth, and he might like to come and have a look at Victoria Hall. And look, my question tonight is, will Council invite the Premier to tour Victoria Hall and the Town Hall with a view to secure government funding? We believe that you've got to get the Premier. I mean, I think the Heritage Minister and Arts Minister haven't got much grunt. This is the same person. But, you know, if Roger Cook has his haircut in town and he drives past every day, please, my question is, will you invite the Premier to tour those two venues with a view to securing government funding? Thank you.
Thank you. We'll take that suggestion. Just to be clear also, deputations do need to be requested. So if a community group wants to make a deputation to council, they do need to be requested ahead of time. I think the policy says 7 days, but it is at the discretion of the presiding member. And if enough notice is given, that's something that would be considered. Thank you. It's also not appropriate for elected members to show things on behalf of other groups in the time in which we make elected member communication, because it could be them being seen to prejudice their own decision making prior to a vote on a matter. So just to be clear on the process, it does need to be requested ahead of time. Thanks. Okay, that brings us to the end of public question time. I don't believe we have any petitions. There are no deputations presentations, so I'll move that we confirm the minutes of the ordinary meeting of council from the 10th of July. I'll get a seconder for that one. Anyone who was here, you'll do. Thank you, Councillor Kamada. It doesn't matter, you can still second it. All those in favour? And that's unanimous. So elected member communication. I know Councillor Kamada wished to say something.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Fitzharding, and good evening, everyone. This is probably a presentation or elected member communication I'd rather not be doing, but I'd just like to touch on the tragic passing of young Nick Campo. Nick Campo, I know personally, and he's a talented young man who played for two of our local clubs that are supported well by the city, the Fremantle Cricket Club and the South Fremantle Football Club. And my association with Nick and his family is through local sporting communities, and it was an accident that has had, it was a tragic accident that's had far-reaching consequences on the community and has affected the community deeply. Jemima Williamson-Wong, Councillor Jeff Graham and myself, we attended Fremantle Oval on Saturday, the Colts football match, where they had a minute's silence to commemorate Nick's life. He was a fantastic kid from a wonderful family, and I would just like to express my condolences to the Campo family on behalf of the city. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kamada, and certainly I think we all join with you in that sentiment. Okay, let's go to our agenda. The first item is the C240711, the proposed sale of Victoria Hall. Do I have a mover for this item? Yeah. Councillor Archibald is moving it and Councillor Mofflin seconding it. All right. Councillor Archibald, did you wish to start the discussion?
Not at this stage, thank you. But I do have some questions I'd like to ask, but they are of a confidential nature, so it would have to be behind closed doors. Thanks.
All right, so because we do have confidential documents associated with this, there is probably a point in this discussion where the meeting will go behind closed doors. I'd suggest to councillors that we do have as much of the discussion prior to that time for transparency and to allow those in the gallery to hear the discussion. So, councillors. Councillor Sullivan.
Thank you. I think all of my comments are not going to be of the confidential matters, so I'll proceed accordingly. I just wanted to start by, I guess, noting that when you've been a councillor for a long time, you sort of rack up quite a lot of ideas and seek certain opportunities and the like. And I know many other current and past elected members have done very similar things. And I just want to speak to the importance of cultural facilities in Fremantle and the sorts of things that we have tried to do in the past and how difficult it is for a city to keep doing it so that the context can be set in terms of what we're doing. I'll move my amendment at the end if that's all right with you, Mayor Fitzharding. Anne Former and I, back in the 90s, spent a lot of time trying to get the council of the day to buy the North Fremantle Town Hall because of its cultural heritage significance. And we even went to the extent of getting two companies, Chrissy Parrott and Two Dance Plus, I think it was, to potentially be the users in that hall. That was only really going to happen if they could then get funding and the like. It didn't happen because it was so difficult to bring all of those things together and then to convince the council to buy the hall at the time, which was worth, I think, $600,000. It might have been $400,000, but it was still a significant amount of money. But it was also in the context of trying to revitalise the North Fremantle Town Centre. The Energy Museum, more recently, before that was redeveloped with the apartment building behind. I spent a lot of time, as did others, trying to work with the new owner of that land to see whether we could get the main hall of that area turned into a cultural facility as well, because it is similarly an amazing space that would be perfect for that sort of activity. And at the time, the sort of users we were thinking about for that building were the long shoved around Circus WA. It was a perfect facility for them and others as well. And of course, if the long-held dream, if I win lotto, or when I win lotto, I should say, to bring the Princess Theatre back into some sort of a cultural facility, because that would be the jewel in the crown. And of course, previous councils have spent a lot of time with state government trying to get theatres built in Fremantle in all sorts of places, including down at the Esplanade and the like. So when the original proposal came up to give consideration to what to do next with Victoria Hall, the first thing that I did is go back to, well, what was the original strategy? The original strategy was to buy the hall, to try and get it back into a fit working state for cultural facilities, to endeavour to get it back into a physical condition that respected its heritage. And I wasn't on council at the time, but I fully support that was a very sound strategy to do. And I wish I'd been able to achieve that with the North Fremantle Town Hall. But when I look at that strategy and I look at purchasing something to make sure that we can guarantee its cultural significance, I'm then challenged by what does that word actually mean? It's not just bricks and mortar. It is also land use, because when a building is built as a hall, as a cultural facility, as a place for cultural activity to occur in it, then the land use is an integral part of that that cultural significance. And so I take the original intent of buying the building to include trying to safeguard its cultural significance. So I've got to say, I am not fully convinced that that means the city has to own the building. And that's where I might differ with some people. But there are many facilities, both in Fremantle, in Perth, around the world, that provide amazing cultural activity, which are not necessarily owned by a local authority. They might be owned by the state or federal governments. They might be owned by philanthropic organisations. They might be owned by a philanthropic individual. There are many opportunities. Unfortunately, in Australia, we perhaps don't have those the level of philanthropy that you might see in Europe or indeed in the United States. But nevertheless, it is, I think, something that is worthwhile always investigating. And I was very hopeful that if through this EIO process, we might be able to encourage an organisation or an individual to come forward with that level of philanthropy and take on the project and take on the cultural activities, both existing and hopefully future, that will hopefully be a part of its cultural significance. And that is the process that we're going through, and I don't think we've exhausted that process. And so I do support that we keep having the conversations, but I want to have a little bit more guarantee, a little bit more certainty that our direction is focused on the cultural significance through its cultural land use into the future. The other thing that I would say is that sometimes having facilities like this owned by local authorities is all well and good until we have to make massive investments to try and improve them. So any local government can only have so much focus on its the extent of its budget that it spends on cultural activity. We spend significant amount of money already on cultural activity in this city, and to really invest into the hall in a way that would improve its functionality, expand its functionality, is another whole level again beyond what was envisaged in the early 2000s or what we could contemplate doing right now. And so the opportunity to put it out there and see whether someone else is willing to do that right now or soon is certainly a worthwhile process. But as I said, I do want to make sure that the future land uses of that building are going to support its cultural significance. And so to that extent, I want to move an amendment, if I may now move that, Madam Mayor, and I'll speak to that in a sec.
Excellent. Do we have a seconder for the amendment? Councillor Lorber?
Thank you. The amendment is very self-explanatory. I think it explains what I'm suggesting in terms of the sorts of conversations that need to be had. There was a suggestion from Councillor Lorber, and I thank Councillor Lorber for putting it forward before I managed to get my amendment in. But the idea that we shouldn't exclude the idea of disposing of the building via lease as opposed to disposing of the building via sale, that should also be an active consideration. Another element of that is that if we do dispose of the building by sale, is there any sort of guideline or contractual arrangement that can be put in place that speaks to the land use question, and or a right of buyback for the community and the council into the future, and also what other mechanisms we can put in place to secure the cultural activity that I think the building deserves. And so that's the nature of the amendment. It tries to, I guess, articulate what I personally believe was the process in the first place, but I think for transparency, it should articulate all of those things that I know elected members have talked about, and I know the community have certainly indicated their support for. So I'll put that to you for consideration.
Thank you, Councillor Sullivan. Councillor Lorber?
I just have a question and possibly a minor amendment should the
mover be amenable to it. On this amendment, it says that these negotiations will occur with proponents 1, 3, 5, and 6. Would that exclude the current tenant from being a part of those discussions? So then I would just, I mean, that's the one thing that I really have kind of reservation about this potential amendment is that it's excluding the current occupant. I'm just wonder if there's a lease, a long-term lease discussion happening, if we could potentially include the current occupants.
Can I just get a bit of, I guess, governance advice on this? Because this is part of a process that was initiated by council, and it just feels to me that maybe we're talking about a different process. So.
Through the chair, we are in the middle of a process that's currently being undertaken under the Act. As the current tenant didn't put in anything to that process, council would need to exclude or finalise this process either tonight or let us through further negotiations before we could let the current tenant into the conversation.
Perhaps we could ask for a point of clarification in terms of, I guess, the intention of 3A. I would have assumed that that's more of an exercise in assessing what the lease potential is rather than going to a particular lessee. I don't know if the Director of City Business can comment on that, but
through the chair, I guess generally all of the points are possible as part of a sale. We probably are too early in the process for these to really apply. Ultimately, what we're trying to do is have a conversation about price at the moment, because if we can't get to a price that we're happy with, we wouldn't recommend the sale of the building in the first place. So if we were able to get to a price that we're happy with, we could then come back and have a conversation about each of these items, which are all possible as part of a sale.
Thank you. Councillor Moughlin?
Thank you. And yeah, I suppose on Councillor Sullivan's proposed amendment and on 3A particularly, like I agree with the sentiment, but I think from my perspective, I can't support 3A because we did start a process which was about sale. And if we are looking and having conversations with 1, 3, 5 and 6 about a long-term lease, hey, there's potentially, and to Councillor Lorva's point as well, a whole bunch of other people out there who might be interested in a long-term lease, which would then be excluded from this conversation. So for me, I think it's a finalisation of a process to understand whether we're able to achieve an outcome which delivers a good financial outcome and, you know, equally cultural outcome for the city via sale, but not lease at this point in time. And if that happens to fall over, then I would be happy for us to look at other options related to a long-term lease. But as part of this amendment, I couldn't support 3A.
All right, so I'm thinking 3A will be moved separately to the remainder of the amendment. Councillors? Councillor Archibald?
I still feel that there is some discussion that would be beneficial to the council that would in fact be confidential. And some of this to some extent would come up in that conversation. And so while I might have a comment or two about this, it is difficult to make it substantially unless we can deal with it in a confidential session. So I just sort of feel like a more robust discussion in that way would be more productive, perhaps.
So, Councillor Archibald, are you wanting to move that we go behind closed doors at this point on the amendment?
Well, if we go behind closed doors just on the amendment, yeah, well, I guess that allows us to talk about all these things, yes.
Yep. All right, so do we have a seconder for going behind closed doors on the amendment so we're able to speak to the confidential attachments? I'll second that for the benefit of deciding whether to do that or not. All right, so I'll ask all those in favour of going behind closed doors. And that's not unanimous. And against, Councillor Moughlin against, so that's carried. So we will now go behind closed doors for this part of the conversation. At the end of the period of behind closed doors, I'll come back and advise, I guess, what the outcome of the conversation was.